I've always been bad at working in groups. You see, it's not working for others or even leading others that's the problem. It's working with others. All my life, I simply could not get past a bad idea. Just one awful suggestion from a team member and the entire endeavor spirals into utter chaos. I am torn between the constraints of common courtesy and the uncontrollable desire to make other people feel bad for being dumb. The instinct is to eject it from the system and destroy any hope of it returning. The compulsion to retreat from the entire activity is strong. It's taken me nearly 30 years to realize that it's just as smart to go the other way. Instead of running from a perceived bad idea, we run towards it. When a person is pointing a bazooka at your chest, do you run away? No, you embrace them. Improv people call it yes-anding. Today, there are no bad ideas in brainstorming. Welcome back to First Draft, Second Pass. I'm Will, and we are in part 2 of our exploration into Star Wars, Episode 1. If you did not watch the first episode, there is a link in the description. I recommend checking that one out before checking out this one. In this video, we're going to expand upon our ideas in part 1 and see if we can't wrestle a better movie with our second pass. So here are the rules. When a writer adapts a person's life into a movie, they have to keep certain events, characters, and set pieces the same, but they have the liberty to dramatize events, merge characters, or simplify connections for clarity and in service of the specific story that they want to tell. This is what we're doing here. We want to keep as much of the old story that we can and change as little as possible. We're not going for the perfect film, just a more watchable film. We want to avoid creating fan fiction. So sorry boys, Jar Jar and Metachlorians are here to stay. Moving on, Episode 1 is roughly divided into 4 parts: Naboo, Tatooine, Coruscant, and Naboo again. Part 1, Naboo. Before we text crawl and tilt down, I'm going to change 3 major players in Act 1. The Trade Federation, the Queen, and Jar Jar Binks. So there are too many bad guys standing around in dresses and 2 little bad guys jumping around with laser swords. I'm promoting Darth Maul. He is now the leader of a mercenary group leading the attack and occupation of Naboo. He's secretly been hired by the Trade Federation and even more secretly a Sith working for Sidious. He is our singular villain, the main antagonist, the one dude to beat. To put it simply, Darth Maul is now the Trade Federation is the Blue Ghost, and Sidious is not in this movie. Side note, this guy's name? Newt Gunray. What a waste. Now the Queen. Instead of a queen named Padme dressed as a handmaiden named Padme and a maiden named Nothing dressed as a queen named Padme, we'll have a handmaiden named Padme dressed as a handmaiden and a queen. That's right, the twist you forgot was a twist is out. Keira Knightley's character just got recast to someone much more appropriately aged to be leading a planet. I have a couple reasons for this. First, having her switch places with her handmaiden is really confusing. The film does too good of a job concealing this from the audience, so much so that when it is finally revealed, you're not sure when Padme was making the choices as the queen or when the handmaiden was making those choices. It makes things murky. Secondly, the prequel trilogy is the story of Anakin Skywalker, and a huge aspect of that story is his courtship of Padme. I don't think you should have to watch the movie 4 times to know when she's actually on the screen. And the age gap weirds me out a bit. Not just physically, I mean mentally. She's got one of the most adult jobs you can ever have, and he's a scrappy little kid. It feels really inappropriate. One last note, you may worry that if Padme is no longer a queen, then her daughter, Princess Leia, would no longer be a princess. Technically, Leia isn't the princess of Naboo. She's the adoptive daughter of Bail Organa and princess of Alderaan. On top of that, Queen Amidala isn't even a real queen. She's democratically elected, and in the next movie, there is a different queen, and Padme is just a senator. So calling her a queen in the first place is incredibly convoluted. So it's 2 characters then. One is the Queen of Naboo, and the other is her handmaiden. Good news! I've now effectively doubled the amount of women in the film. Now to Jar Jar. We are recasting him as a crazy recluse working on strange experiments. More importantly, he only speaks Gungan, a language neither Obi-Wan or Qui-Gon understand. Let's pour one out for the dumbest catchphrase of all time. How rude, how rude, how rude, how rude. Here's the thing. Oafs are lovable, goofballs are joyful, sad sacks are endearing, fools are fun, but idiots are annoying. Taking away a basic form of communication and watching characters interact creates the environment for comedy without degrading characters. Jar Jar is pretty underdeveloped as a character. When we meet him, he's just standing around in the woods, and he explains later that he's outcast for tripping over things a lot. And it's really all that we know about him, other than he apparently doesn't understand the concept of ownership.
Ah, Mori.
It's hard to connect with a character who's a buffoon and also a mystery. So let's give him a job and a perspective on something that is prevalent throughout the movie. technology. We'll establish that in the past he was once a pioneer in blue bubble bomb technology, but he was cast out when he blew a few too many things up. So our film opens up on our Jedi friends getting mixed up in a conflict between Naboo and a droid army. They meet a Gungan amid the chaos and attempt to rescue the Queen and her handmaiden. The rescue goes awry and the trip to Coruscant is postponed when they crash land on Tatooine. Part 2, Tatooine. 2 changes, Obi-Wan and Anakin. Obi-Wan is wasted in this movie. He just follows Qui-Gon around and occasionally quips a few lines, and if you remove him from the film entirely, nothing changes. Well, except the one thing. So let's leave him and our new character of the Queen to fight Darth Maul on Naboo. I barely consider this a change at all, since once they get to Tatooine, Obi-Wan just spends most of the time on the phone. This will also solve some pacing issues and gives us an interesting B story. We can have the Queen incrementally reveal to Obi-Wan just how messed up working with the Senate is, peppering in some foreshadowing while we're at it. Obi-Wan can also stumble into the mystery of who Darth Maul is and who he's working for. Plus, Darth Maul and Obi-Wan are arguably the 2 best characters in the prequel, so let's have him fight more. He can quip and be a badass and not spend all of his time counting dresses.
The Queen's wardrobe maybe, but not enough for you to barter with.
Moving on to Anakin. So Qui-Gon is convinced that Anakin is the chosen one because of his metachlorian count and because he's a particularly clever 9-year-old, which is to say, still pretty f***ing stupid. There is a concept in filmmaking called show don't tell, which is the idea that instead of having characters explain various aspects of the film's world, we should be shown those things. It is a highly visual medium after all. In episode 1, the Podracing scenes are actually a perfect example of a good use of show don't tell. Anakin is shown to be resourceful, talented, and determined. He solves a number of problems on the fly and comes out victorious. It also helps that he keeps his mouth shut. The problem is that by the time we get to the Podracing scene, we've already been introduced to a lot of Anakin, and by then we almost want him to lose the race.
Are you an angel? What?
I think including a few more scenes early on where it is heavily implied that Anakin is using the Force will help us get on board with Qui-Gon's theory. Also, at some point in the film, I really want to see a hint of Darth Vader in Anakin. Anakin does some really dark stuff later in the films, and it's always easier accepting that turn if we see it early. What's fun about prequels is that we already know the ending, and none of the characters do. It's like being in on a secret. All it takes is a wink and a nod. The marketing team sure understood that. So after all that, Qui-Gon and the gang eventually get the parts that they need and resume their trek to Coruscant with Anakin in tow. Part 3, Coruscant. 2 notes here, the Jedi and the Queen. I really want to see more of the Jedi and what it means to become a Padawan. This is the first movie where we see an active and thriving Jedi organization, and I want to see more of it. I want to see what kinds of different Jedi there are, what opinions they have. We see the Council, but show me the troops. What are the other Jedi Knights like? What are the other Padawans like? What is Anakin missing out on when he doesn't get accepted? Right now there is a lot of talking, but not much showing. So this is the part in the film where we experience the most amount of failure. Padme fails to get the Senate to act, Qui-Gon doesn't get Anakin into the Jedi program. These failures are big, but visually they kind of suck. It has to be explained what happened, and really they feel more like setbacks rather than failures. I want to add a new failure, the death of a monarch. Our queen is murdered in cold blood by our villain Darth Maul. Obi-Wan fails to stop it. Now it's personal. A character we've hopefully come to like is dead, and death is a real option for at least one of our other characters. More importantly, our character's resolve and motivation could not be more clear. We need to put an end to Darth Maul. On to Part 4, Naboo, again. Main focuses, Anakin, Palpatine, Qui-Gon. So Anakin doesn't have a reason to be on Naboo. He's just there because Qui-Gon is there. After being rejected by the Jedi Council, Qui-Gon says right away, don't worry about it, I'm still going to train you. I think a more powerful moment would be Qui-Gon accepting his failure and sending Anakin back to Tatooine. Then we can have Anakin skip out on the ride back home and sneak onto the ship that's going to Naboo. Show me that Anakin really does want to be a Jedi. Have him not take no for an answer. Then when he's mucking it up in a Naboo fighter, it's because he made the choice to be there and not because Qui-Gon is the world's worst babysitter. Of course, when Qui-Gon discovers what happened, it only emboldens his belief that Anakin is indeed special. Now let's talk about Palpatine. Palpatine is a bit hard to read in the film. It's not clear if he's a good guy or a bad guy or just a dick. That's not always a bad thing, but it does mean that I don't really have an opinion about him. I want to change that. Since I removed Darth Sidious from the film, I think a good replacement for him is Darth Sidious. But this time, recast him as a mob boss. Look, the Senate is supposed to be this corrupt, ineffective system, and I think a great opportunity to show this is in the third act, with Palpatine accepting his new position as Supreme Chancellor and then immediately using his power to secure his interests by eliminating 2 loose ends. The path to the Empire is not lined with blasters and swords, but with dirty tricks and lies. And finally, we need to talk about Qui-Gon Jinn. So in the last video, I established that I think Qui-Gon is a brash, one-track-minded jerk. A lot of people took it to mean that I didn't like him, or that I somehow thought he was a bad character. But I actually really like that fact about him. I see the Jedi as the police of the galaxy, and Qui-Gon is a harsh homicide detective who's constantly being overlooked for a promotion because of his bad attitude and radical views of the Force. So I think throughout the film, Qui-Gon should be preaching his unique view of the Force, which is always at odds with what Obi-Wan and others have learned. I don't want to change Qui-Gon, I just want to lean into it at every opportunity. So I have one last idea that is totally breaking my anti-fanfiction stance. But whatever, you made it this far, and if I've not upset you enough to turn this off, then I doubt I could now. At the end of the movie, when Obi-Wan and Qui-Gon are fighting Darth Maul, who by this point has revealed that he is a Sith working for some unknown master, we find out that he was at one point the apprentice of Qui-Gon Jinn. And here's the real fanfiction-y idea. Qui-Gon used to believe that Maul was the chosen one. So it now becomes obvious to Obi-Wan that maybe Qui-Gon's more radical views of the Force have unintended consequences, that maybe he has a stronger connection to the dark side, and that maybe his master is not who he thinks he is. Then he dies, and Obi-Wan is left to train a little boy who's excited to be the chosen one. And this is the start of Anakin Skywalker's training. End movie. Let's recap what we learned. Less characters can streamline motivations and give a film an objective, though sometimes more characters can streamline motivations and give clarity. Talking about how great you are is less desirable than just being great. Lean into character flaws. You have to respect your characters if you want audiences to. Characters need agency and something to do. And finally, foreshadowing is a great way to make it seem like you know what you're doing, even if you don't. My favorite comic book character is the same as every white man my age: Batman. When I was little, he was my favorite character because my favorite animal was a bat. He was my favorite character in high school because he was dark and moody, and so was I. And he's my favorite character now because enough of my brain has atrophied and I can no longer formulate new opinions. But I got into comic books later in life, and the one thing that people always ask you is, who is your favorite comic book character? To which I now say Batman. But if you are into comics, you know that that question is ultimately meaningless. Because if you really like comic books, who the character is almost irrelevant compared to who is writing the character. That's how Adam West, Michael Keaton, George Clooney, Kevin Conroy, Christian Bale, and Ben Affleck are all equally Batman. Batman's story is told and retold again. What changes isn't the story, but how the story is being told. Each new iteration of Batman's story doesn't erase the old one, it builds on it. I love Star Wars, and when you love something, you have to be honest with it. The prequels are bad movies. They have an interesting story to tell, but they are not good movies. You may be curious on what gives me the authority to say this, and I could list my education in the field or the 10 years I've been working with story and video, but honestly, it comes down to this. I've seen them. So you may hate my version of the Phantom Menace, and you may hate Joel Schumacher's Batman, and that's fair, but some people like Batman Forever, and that's okay too. I don't see any problem with looking at something, seeing what it was meant to be, and wanting more. So why not give this a second shot? Why not try a different Phantom Menace? Your move, Bob Iger. Speaking of comic books, next episode.